Hello, everyone. This is Jimmy Cultist, back again with another logic video. Today we're going to be talking about how to create a grappling hook that can grapple onto a fixed point and allow you to swing, I suppose. So let's get right down to business. The first thing that I have made is a sculpt, not labeled, although it is collidable, with another sculpt inside of it, labeled machine, which is also collidable. And this is going to act as our grapple point. On the outside of the group, I have a microchip called grapple pull. And I've stamped a little tag from sensors and input right here. And I've named it. If you just open it up with L1 and square, you can rename it to can't grapple. You can technically name it anything, just so long as you're being consistent about the wording when it comes time to have it interact with another piece of logic. But when a trigger zone called can't grapple is active, this tag will send an output to this keyframe action recorder. Set to keyframe mode, I should say. And it has a single frame. All it does is shut off the logic over here, which I'm going to get to later. It's just a simple piece of material that's invisible and non-collidable with a microchip stamped on it, and there's logic inside that, but I'll get to that later. All this does is turn it off. And this is going to keep you from interacting with this logic when you are swinging back and forth on the rope from this tether point. Next, we're going to get into this, which is another microchip called face direction. And all this does is realign our logic to face the direction that the player is approaching from. For this purpose, I have stamped out a trigger zone set to detect label. It detects a friend and non-collidable or invisible. Not really entirely necessary, but I wanted to hedge my bets. And our little player character over here, if you open his logic with L1 and square, you can go over here and change his label to friend. Another thing I've made is he does not collide with things labeled object. Just thought I'd mention that real quick for later. But this trigger zone leads to the input B on the selector. You can find the selectors here in logic and processing. And the output of B runs into a keyframe. Just a regular keyframe, not an action recorder. And all it does is reverse this block so that it's facing the other way. So when this zone is triggered, the block will face in the direction that the zone is being triggered. So if the player approaches from that direction, the block will face that way. If the player approaches from this direction, it'll face the other way. Now you may notice I don't have two keyframes. That's because the default direction is this direction, and by simply attaching the output of detected from this trigger zone to the input of this NOT gate and then attaching its output to A, we can reset the default as long as this zone is not being touched. So when you're on this side, keyframe on. When you're on this other side, outside of the trigger zone, default is this direction. That'll save on logic. And that's pretty much everything in this microchip. Next, let's get into the point microchip. In here, I have two tags. One is called Can Grapple. I've moved it to the center, which you can easily do by pressing L1 and square to open this menu, and then you can move it around with R2 in any direction you want, as long as you're oriented properly. It's called Can Grapple, and it's going to act as a sort of a check, wherein the player must be able to interact with this tag before they can fire the grappling hook. And I'm going to do that by having a zone on the player side that triggers this. And once the zone detects this tag, it'll realize there's a proper point for it to, grapple onto. Next, I've got another tag called Grapple Point, which also will be triggered by a zone. When the player is throwing the grappling hook, a zone will be activated. A zone which detects a tag called Grapple Point, and when the output of that tag is active, it will emit the grapple cord, which is the next piece of logic I want to get into. Real quick though, it's going to be emitted once. It has a permanent lifetime, and the max number emitted at once is 1, just in case. And no velocity, speed, or any of that stuff is needed. Just take this little thing and select that logic. Now, of course, that logic, if you haven't built it yet, won't be ready, but we're going to get into how to make that. I just wanted to address this poll real quick while we were still, Now I'm going to address the tether point, which is a group, as it happens. A group made up of 2 parts. One is an invisible piece of material, for which I have placed a microchip. It's also non-collidable. But on here are several bits of logic. One is this trigger zone called Can't Grapple. Maybe it should be called Can Grapple. Oh, wait a minute, no, it is called Can't Grapple. And the reason why it's called Can't Grapple is, if you remember this piece of logic here, it's just to trigger that and make sure that when this grapple point is right here, it'll be shutting off this logic, because this will interfere with the process in general. And it's just on constantly. Next, we have the other piece of logic, which comes from movers and output. It's a look at rotator set to 180 speed, 100% rotation strength, 100% overall dampening, and it follows a tag called player, which I've placed inside the player's logic. It would look like this, only it's called player. And I've turned down the Y strength in the secondary settings, so it won't be able to face up and down. It will only be able to rotate on a flat plane to face the player wherever they are. This is important for creating the logic necessary. I want the player to swing in the proper orientation and always have this thing face them properly. It's not as important with this particular rope, but if you wanted to make the rope separate and not emitted, like just hanging in the level, this would be very important to get right. Now, there is also something leading into the power of our look at rotator, and we're going to go down here real quick to another piece of logic, so we can get a gander at what's going on here. If we scope into this group with L1 and X, we'll see that it's made up of if I got this right, it's made up of, we gotta scope in twice. It's made up of 3 parts Well, technically 4 if you count this. It's not really entirely necessary. It's just a guide for the endpoint. Invisible and non-collidable. This pole is actually collidable and labeled object. However, it only collides with scenery, not with the player or anything else. So keep that in mind. And it will keep us from going through walls when we're swinging. I also have this piece of logic here, mounted to an invisible block that is non-collidable. It's a little microchip. And as you can see, the cord that leads into player is the output from a timer. If you open the timer with L1 and square, you'll see the timer finished signal. Just go ahead and connect that to the power of this look at rotator. Now we're going to get back down to this later, but there's some other things I want to address first. Next, we have this little gizmo called face direction. Another thing I want to demonstrate is our player look at rotator is actually facing in the direction we expect the player to be swinging from, whereas our face direction look at rotator is facing the opposite direction of the player. Basically, the direction the player will be swinging towards rather than the direction the player is swinging from. And it's pretty much the same in all other regards, except it's called face direction. And what this is going to be used for is when the player is on the rope, I want to have the ability to redirect which direction the rope can swing. And I have this mode you can go into where you can grab the rope and dangle for a while and turn the direction you want to swing manually using L1, but we'll get to that later. I just wanted to cover this real quick before we get started. Another thing I should mention is this pole and all this other logic contained within this single group is connected to this block with a connector. A bolt, to be precise. Now if you open the bolt with L1 and square, well, you don't have to open it, but as long as you're in X-ray mode and you can see connectors, you can realign this thing with L2 to get the right angle that you want. But basically you just want it roughly so that the thing swings horizontally from this point to that point and not have any weird diagonal drift or anything. Just get it dead center as best as you can. Make sure to put on limits, use limits. And you can extend these little yellow things to wherever you want. I extended them about to here, and this blue thing acts as the relative position of the bolt, so you'll want to put that where our blue material group is. And that's pretty much all I have to say about the connector. Now that we're done with that, we might as well get into what's going on inside this microchip, which I put it on a separate piece of material because I was thinking of later adding the ability to climb up and down the rope. I currently haven't figured out how to do that, but just in case, I have mounted it to this brick, because I think that would be essential in creating that effect. But let's go back here. We might as well look at what's going on with this stuff. First of all, our counter, right here, is turned on. I just took the current count and set it to 1 because we want it to be active. And from its output, the counter full output, I've connected it to the start time of this timer, which is set to positional and a target time of 1.2 seconds. And basically what it does is, when it's done counting, the output goes all the way up here, and turns on this lookout rotator so that the cord will face the player, no matter where the player is currently. And secondarily, it goes to this little piece of logic mounted on top of this entire group. And inside of this microchip is a gyroscope. Now, all the gyroscope does is point upward and basically reset the position of this cord to the default of hanging in the air. Now, this is very useful if you want to make the rope separate from the player and just have it be, you know, in the environment, so that when the player is not swinging on it, the rope will lose momentum and reset. That's why I set it to 70.8 speed, so it'll be kind of gradual. The dampening is pretty low, but the strength is at maximum. I'm also using the output from this lookout rotator face direction. When it finds the tag it's looking for, the found target output will send a signal, which you can attach with X, to this gyroscope, and that's exactly what I've done, so that when you're aiming the rope and trying to redirect where you want to swing, this gyroscope will be active and the rope will just go dead still right down here instead of being, you know, swinging all over the place wildly. That way it'll be easier for you to redirect yourself. But that's what this timer does. Secondarily, the counterfull output goes to this here, which is a action recorder set to keyframe mode, and it's on loop, of course. Which, by the way, if I mention these things at all, I've always got them set to loop, if they're a single frame, that is. And all it does is make this piece of material non-collidable so that it won't interfere with the player while they're mounted to it. Or at least, actually, it's when they're not mounted to it, so that basically when you're off the rope, it can swing into solid objects. And the only reason why I do this is because if I want it to reset to just hanging still in the air, it needs to be able to travel through any impediment that might be in the way. Otherwise it'll get stuck on things and you won't be able to use it properly again. And it should be noted that when the player is on this counter will be set to 0, we have this trigger zone called grab rope, set to detect a tag called grab rope, that is. And I've made it a cube-shaped zone. It's really quite large to make sure that the player is caught in it. The player will automatically jump to this position when this is active. So I've made it really large so the player is definitely caught. And it will reset the counter, so collision will be on the rope while the player is swinging on it. And that's pretty much all this does. Secondarily, we have the jumped tag, which I've added here. And when an appropriate trigger zone is applied, it will send an output that turns this back on. And you may have guessed that since it's labeled jumped, it'll be when the player jumps off of the rope that this counter is reset and has its amount increased, making the collision go off and making the rope reset to its default position. Now, this is actually more useful if it's separate from the player. Again, I made this so that you could do it either way you want. If you want it to delete when the player presses jump, I've added this tag called destroy rope. And when the proper trigger zone is applied to that, it'll just destroy this entire object. Although, make sure to scope outside the group, then open the destroyer with L1 and square, then take the wire from affected objects and apply it like so to the entire group, just to make sure everything's destroyed instead of a single piece of it. But yeah, this is pretty much the jumped output for when the player's jumping. And I've also attached it to the reset timer so that it'll reset all of its functions as well. And there's one final little tag, which is called rope mount. And it's dead center of this little block here. And all it does is act as a tether point for a teleporter, which I'm going to go in here real quick and take a look at it. This is a teleporter, as you can see, labeled to chase a tag called rope mount. And that's just going to make the player stick to this thing like glue when the time comes. And that's pretty much all the important logic contained within this. I would like to mention one little thing. I'm going to turn this on because it's in emitter mode, but normally when it's visible, I can turn on preview invisibility, and you'll see this paint fleck, which I created using rule fleck. Set to server snap. All I did was do something like that. And it's a part of this group. The cylinder, the brick, and whatnot. It's not set to physical, so it's going to be stiff as a board. But I've copied it down here as a little end, and I've adjusted the endpoint to be 22% instead of its usual length. And it is set to physical 62% floppiness, and that's to give the illusion that our rope does have a little bit of bendiness, while also being extremely cheap and efficient at the same time. That's pretty much all I have to say about the tether. Now we're going to get into the good stuff, which is the player logic itself. We've all been looking forward to it, and it's by far the part that is the most important and the most confusing, but I'll try to make it as easy as possible to understand. First of all, if we scope into our puppet, we're going to open up the puppet logic with L1 and X, same way that you scope in. I've put the puppet's interface inside of a microchip called int for short, so I can easily turn this off whenever I want to. This controls the puppet's basic movement functions in case you want to limit them and make him unable to move. I've also created a microchip called all, which contains all of the various functions that we may want to shut off at any point. We have all poses, running poses, and jump animations. We have here, which should be properly labeled, but it's basically a wire that leads to, if we press L1 and square, it's connected by a node to procedural animations. This switch controls it. So when we shut off this switch, procedural animations will be off. And this switch connected to a node leads to the puppet interface and the power. So when it's shut off, puppet interface will also be shut off. And the reason why I've put them all inside this single chip is in case I want to shut them all off. For efficiency's sake, it's better to use a single wire rather than individually turning all these things off separately. Just a little handy piece of logic. I've also stamped out this little tag called cam mount, short for camera mount. I put it about here in position, and it's going to affect these camera logic bits I've created over here. We'll get into those later, but I'm just going to cover it real quick because it's here. Next, I've got this controls chip, inside of which is contained a node labeled L1. And if we go over here to our controller sensor and open it with L1 and square, we can see that I've taken the L1 prompt and connected it to this. And we'll get into where that goes and what it does a little bit later. Next, I've stamped out this aim logic chip, inside of which I've put our camera aiming controls, which come from the MM first-person puppet created by Media Molecule. You can see it right here. This is for if we want to manually aim the grappling hook. But I've gone ahead and pressed L1 and R2 and just stamped it right in there because I find it convenient. It has all the logic you could want for this particular subject. Next, I have a node connected to a timeline set to play once, 200% playback speed. On the timeline I have a switch, the output of which is connected to this NOT gate. And the NOT gate, of course, is connected to the power of this node to prevent playback. And the prompt I've connected from the controller sensor is square. So when we press square, we will fire our grappling hook to begin grappling. And I'm going to go inside here to show you some of the logic that I employed. First off, I have a look at rotator set to 100% strength on dampening and such, and 180 rotation speed. It does not go up and down though. I've turned off the Y strength. It really wouldn't anyway, because for some reason the puppet always nullifies Y strength. I'm not exactly sure why that is. But it's set to follow a tag called can grapple, which you may have noticed in here earlier. It's right there. So it'll be pointing toward that. I've also got a follower following the same tag, 25% strength, 100% strength, and overall dampening is 100%. 25% speed is what I should have said. It also follows can grapple. It's set to 0% X strength and Y strength, and basically this will just put you in position for when you're ready to swing. It's not even entirely necessary, to be honest. It just kind of helps make things look a little better. Next, I've got an action recorder set to keyframe mode with a single frame. And if we go over here to show/hide and turn on invisible connectors, we can see that this connector turns off our little controls chip. So this will keep us from aiming the camera while we are currently throwing the grappling hook and about to swing. And it'll just shut off that control logic right there. We have another action recorder which shuts off all of our various procedural animations and puppet interface and poses or animations that might interfere with our grappling hook animation. So it shuts off all of that. Next, I have attached a little paint fleck. By grouping this paint fleck with the puppet's hand, which if you want to know how to group things, just press X on them. Press X on both objects, and then press this little thing here. But this paint fleck normally is set to 0% on the end point, and it's just going to act as a little illusion that we're throwing out a rope. It's set to physical, 22% floppiness. And this little keyframe here, which is set to linear blend, by the way, this one is set to linear blend also, although it contains no animation. It's sort of a default state, if you will. But all this does is turn up the endpoint slightly so that the rope is extended a little bit when the player is getting ready to throw. And this one finally extends the rope to full length. just to give the illusion that we're, pulling it out and throwing it. So that's going to extend the rope to full length and give the illusion that we're, throwing a grappling hook. It probably would look better if you attached, a rope in his hand so that when he's not throwing it, you have a coiled up rope so it looks better. But I'm in a hurry and I just want to demonstrate the business. Next we have a little trigger zone called grapple point, set to detect a tag, which you may be familiar with from earlier. Grapple point, and this is what's going to emit our tether. I've made the zone about this big. I don't want it to be too close when the player is using it. I don't want it, if you had another one over there, I don't want them to accidentally activate that one as well. Next, I've got an action record. By the way, real quick, keep in mind when you're placing these things in a scene not to have them bunched up too much, otherwise this is going to be really goofed up. But anyway, here's an action recorder, and it just has a simple animation of the puppet, throwing out the grappling hook and leaping a little as if it's found an attachment. Next, we have a switch, the output of which leads into this. And I'm going to get into how exactly this works a little bit later. But that's everything inside the AIM logic chip. We might as well go ahead and open up the rope logic chip over here, a microchip. It's a bit dense in here, a lot of stuff going on. But the first and most primary thing we're going to need is a selector. Then we're going to stamp out a tag called grab rope, which we will attach to the B input. The B input we will attach to a node. That node we will attach to a piece of logic, a microchip called on rope. And you may have noticed earlier, if you're looking at this, no, not this, sorry, wrong piece of logic. This is what I meant. The grab rope zone I was talking about earlier that attaches the player, it activates this and puts us into rope swinging mode, if you will. And in here we have a microchip containing our teleporter called rope mount, which I mentioned earlier. There's the rope mount chip right on there. I've also used grid snap to make sure that the Z axis is facing forward and the X is facing to the left. It's set to match target orientation as well. Next, we have an action recorder, which shuts off various pieces of logic. I'm going to go over and take a look at what it shuts off. First, it shuts off all of our procedural animations and whatnot. It also shuts off our aim logic, because we really don't want to be able to aim while we're swinging the rope. That would be very glitchy. It also, I think it does something to the puppet, but I'll have to take a look. It shuts off the puppet's collidability, which comes in handy when he's attached to the rope. It's just to make sure he doesn't, glitch out and have any collision issues with the rope itself or anything else until he's ready to jump. We also have the pose, which is just a simple keyframe of the puppet making a pose as if he's attached to the rope. And it should be noted that this thing will have to be powered on before being put inside the chip so that it's constantly active when this chip is active. We also have a switch inside this chip which leads over here to this thing called force. And it should be noted that this thing is attached to an invisible block that is non-collidable. And I've put a microchip on it called Telly. It really probably isn't a good idea to call it Telly. These are really actually camera mounts. But just calling them camera would be fine. There's two of them for two different purposes. One is the default camera that I use when you're swinging on the rope, and the other is the aiming camera, which you use to attach to the rope. But I'll get into this real quick. Inside the microchip is a force applier, or I should say a microchip containing force appliers. And these are going to change the trajectory speed, I should say, maybe just the speed, not the trajectory. They're going to change the speed of our rope, which, by the way, our rope, if you go outside the entire group, if you go outside of this group, that is, not that one, it's labeled object, and it doesn't collide with friend. And all of these force appliers apply force to both non-collidable and invisible things. And they apply it to something labeled object, which this is labeled. And this is going to push our rope around and create momentum when we're swinging. I've set it to a force speed of 5.0 for the initial boost, the starting boost. And it's just a little square set to directional push. 100% strength, of course. And you may recognize that our little fire grapple thing has this switch which leads directly into this, which is the starting boost. So when we hit the rope, immediately we're going to get a nice bit of momentum, just in case our own forward momentum is not enough. Just thought I'd mention that real quick. Now we're going to go back here and take a look at some other things. Oh, another thing. Make sure you connect to the A output of this selector to the grab rope feature so that it will not be active when B is active. So once it's served its purpose of triggering B, it will no longer have power because A is no longer active. We've also got this little tag called player, which, if you remember earlier, I made it so the look at rotator on the top follows the player. And I just stuck it in there. It doesn't have to be in here, but it's fine. Next, I've connected B to this little thing here, which is a timeline set to play once with a little switch on it. And all the switch does is connect to some logic inside here, which I'll get to later. But needless to say, if you stamp a selector in here, which this is an invisible piece of material, unlabeled, non-collidable, and invisible, with a microchip on it, just put a selector in here real quick, and make sure to attach this switch to the A output on that selector. We'll get back to this real quick later and talk about what it does. Next, we have another output from B leading into a timer set to positional 5.0 time, and its output is connected to this, or I should say a switch inside this. And what this is our jump button for when we want to leave. And it basically uses my same old method of, node attached to a timeline on the switch, attached to a NOT gate, attach the power of the node to prevent playback, Set to play once, of course. And we're going to get into what this does. But this is our ability to leave the rope and leap off of it. And we've connected B on here because we don't want you to be able to jump unless B is active. Unless you're on the rope, you won't be able to jump off of it. And we're going to get in here real quick. There is a mover set to local space, 50% overall dampening, 100% movement strength, 6.5 movement speed. I've slightly angled it up to give you a little bit of a jumping motion. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the mover. And there's the switch, of course, that connects to our NOT gate. Next is this little switch called reset. And of course, the output of this timer leads into the power of this switch. The on and off power. And where does that switch go? It goes to A. So once we have jumped and reached the end of our jump cycle, it will reset the selector to A, default state, off the rope. Next we have an action recorder, which shuts off this node. And you may wonder why we have this node in the first place. It's so we can shut off this logic without having it interfere with what's going on in here. Because this logic here controls the position of the player and the pose that they're in, and because the selector is not set to default until the entire sequence is over, I've created this action recorder to shut off the node and temporarily make these things not active. And you may wonder, well, why don't you just move this to the beginning of the timeline? That's because I do want B active enough to make this timer play and this timeline also play. So, I think I've explained that well enough. Next is a trigger zone set to detect a tag called jumped. It's very large so that it can't be missed. It'll definitely hit the tag we want, which, if you remember earlier, jumped is connected to this. It resets the default state. It's not entirely necessary for this particular logic to have this. This is more if the cord was just in the environment hanging statically and you jumped on it. This would be useful for resetting its logic. But we actually have another trigger zone which destroys our emitted cable by triggering this destroy rope. And it's also a very large sphere just to make sure this action finds its mark and sets off the destroyer. And that's everything inside of our jump or leap timeline. So, is there anything else we have not covered? Oh yes, I think there is. The B output goes to one last little microchip called rope swing. I have attached the left stick local output from the controller sensor to this node called left stick. And I have made a microchip called directional push. Inside here is all the logic that is necessary to give the rope momentum when swinging and direction. And I'll explain it in a little bit. Needless to say, though, this node is going to be connected to a splitter. And real quick, I'm going to power this on because it's a lot easier to observe some of this logic when it's powered on. This splitter from left stick local. By the way, make sure it's the local left stick and not just the normal left stick output. Just want to make sure that you know that. But Y/up and down will be going in to this other splitter. And it's going to get a little confusing from here on out, but try to follow with me. Negative will be connected to this node. This node will be connected to another node. And that node will be connected to a timeline. And of course, there's a switch on the timeline connected to this NOT gate to prevent playback. A familiar thing we've all seen before. And there's this little blue switch. And where does this little blue switch go? It goes into force appliers. It creates the initial boost when you're swinging forward. Only when you're swinging forward, though. It's set to 1.0 and 100% force strength. Now, this only happens when your rope is swinging backwards like so, and that only can occur after you've already swung forwards, and I'll get into how I limit this later. But I've called it, let's see, second boost. It also goes all the way over here and connects to C on our selector. We're going to get into what this does later. Just be sure you connect it to that selector we stamped out earlier on the green piece of material called orientation. Now we have a similar piece of logic as what we saw before. A node connected to a node. Basically an exact copy of this in almost every way. The only difference is plus, or actually no, minus is leading into this one as well. So it's almost an exact duplicate. The only difference is, where does this switch go? This switch goes to first boost, which is 3.8 speed, 100% force strength. And first boost is basically if you're standing completely still and you want to move forward, this is going to be your initial burst of speed. Which is why it's higher than the second boost, which is a little bit more, you know, low effort. Doesn't do as much juice. And third and final, we have, again, duplicated logic, and this is where plus is going to come in. So when you push forward and backward on the controller, if you're pushing backward, it's going to lead to this node, and into here, and this timeline called boost back. So when you've swung forward and you want to swing back, this is what's going to be needed. And I've got this red switch, which leads into, it appears to lead into both the A and B. That doesn't make sense. I'm gonna have to take a closer look at this. It probably should just lead into B. Neutral, or no, not B, forward. It should lead into B, which, by the way, I want to go back real quick, just in case. Make sure that this one, in boost 1, make sure the power of this is connected to B on the selector. So, let's go through this real quick again, just in case, because this can get confusing. B, oh, that one doesn't seem to lead anywhere. B, forgot to have it selected. And B, so default. Now that that's all through, we're going to get into some other logic concerning this thing, the orientation sensor. The A output of our orientation sensor is going to go into this, which is a angle sensor. And by default, the arrow is facing up, and it's just going to be this way, you know, from the outset. And the whole reason why we had to mount this to a block is for some reason orientation sensors don't seem to show up on the puppet, so it can be very difficult to work with them and reorient them. But basically, when you start out on the rope, this is going to be active, and it's going to allow you to do the forward boost. If you just take the angle range met output and connect it to the power of this node, which is what I did. Next we have B, which connects to the forward angle sensor, and I've set it to 99% for the range. And I've moved this little ball thing back here to about right there, so that when we're in that proper position, which would be here, basically once the puppet has swung far enough forward that this intersects with that, and the range has been met, better take a look at where it goes. It will go into the power of this first node, which is the boost 2 or second boost. And C, of course, goes into the third and final one, which is backward, which is angled the exact opposite direction of the other. Set forward. It does take a little calibration to get this right and to your liking, but it works. And once you have the angle met, it will power on this node. And that's everything concerning orientation. It can be very, very confusing, and I'm still a little bit uncertain about some of these wires leading in here. I want to make sure that we know where all of this is going. This is the reset wire. Okay, just going to go back there and make sure that that's what's leading into B, and everything is accounted for. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to our camera mounts. Now that we've covered everything else, we can finally get to the camera mounts, which we did put a force applier on before, but we're going to need more than that. We're going to need something called cam mount. It's a teleporter, and it's set to match target position, but not target orientation. I've moved it so that it's roughly in the center of the block. And you may recognize cam mount from earlier, but what you don't know is that it's affected by our camera controls. In here, if we go all the way over to camera pitch and animate body, we have a pitch up keyframe, which pitches our tag upward and will realign this camera. Well, not this one, it will realign that one, but I'm going to mention it real quick because it's going to be useful later. And pitch down will pitch it down. I've also added little animations so the player looks like he's aiming. It's not really much, but it gets the idea across. It's actually over here that we'll find the teleporter that is set to match target orientation. It's also called cam mount, and it will go up and down when the player is aiming. Just thought I'd mention that real quick. Anyway, teleporter is the least of our worries. Next, we have a little red node called angle. And the output from L1 goes into angle. And angle is connected to a tag called face direction set directly in front of our camera. So when the camera is rotating, this tag will rotate with it. And if you remember earlier, we have a face direction lookout rotator on the cord to make it face the direction we want to go. The second output from this node leads all the way over here to B, which is the default. That means that when we're completely still and reorienting the rope, we are going to be dead, dead silent, dead in the water, not able to move, and this neutral angle sensor will be the default again. So that we can kick off from being, still. Next is this piece of logic here. A node connected to the B output of this selector and also connected to a NOT gate, so that when we're not applying power, by default we're going to reset to A. Now what does this node do and where does it come from? If we go over here, we can see L1 again is what activates this node. There's also a little action recorder in here which shuts this node off. It's inside the on-rope microchip, in case you're wondering. The on-rope microchip also shuts off the collision of the player, but we went into that earlier. Just want to make sure I cover all the basics. It gets confusing at this part. Anyway, back to our selector. The selector is connected to this rotator, which I must admit I'm a little bit confused as to what it follows, because I don't believe there's anything called second face. And maybe it's in the other one. I don't know. But for now, let's consider this maybe unnecessary. Possibly this is useless. I don't know. It could be a piece of logic before I fully developed everything. But just ignore it for now. B, though, leads to this other camera mount, this microchip called AIM. And inside here we have a camera, and this is oriented so that when the player is aiming, it'll be over the shoulder like so. That's what we're dealing with. It's set to smooth, blend, or transition time, smooth, 0.1, high dimps, nothing else necessary. Oh, this is it. Second face. This tag is going to orient. This camera mount will follow that one. Now, I'm assuming Y strength is turned off. And this is just so when you switch aiming modes, both cameras will be consistent with one another. One won't be facing the exact opposite direction, because that would be very confusing. So just be sure to put this in here, full strength, follows a tag called second face, 0% Y strength, and put this forward so that they'll be oriented roughly the same. I've also got this little switch which leads over here to our camera controls. It just turns those on when we press L1, essentially, so that that's active when this is active. Simple stuff. Next we have a laser scope. Now the laser scope is at a funny angle. It's roughly oriented to match the camera when we're aiming. And getting it in the right position may be a little tricky. You can move it around with L2 or R2 to move the base position. As long as this menu's open, you can mess around with it. L1 and square to open this menu, by the way. And it's set to detect non-collidable and invisible objects, labeled machine. It's also set to X-ray mode, although you could turn that off and it would probably work just as well. And all it does is connect to this keyframe. And what does this keyframe do? Well, first of all, if we go into the aim logic and go to reticle, I've got two reticles, which are defaults in the MM logic. One is this simple white aiming reticle, which is set to power on, and the other is a larger one that I've increased the size of, which is by default powered off. But when this keyframe finds something labeled machine, it will turn the first one off and the second one on, giving you an indicator when you're able to grapple. It also shuts off this NOT gate, which is the default NOT gate for when you're not in aim mode. So here and here, and I think that's all the things it does. Yes, we've covered all our bases there. And that's everything in our aim camera in a nutshell. Now if we go back here to the first one, and if you connected B to this camera aim chip, we're now going to get into what A does. A connects to a secondary camera. This secondary camera can only aim on a flat plane. You could make it a three-dimensional camera and it would work just as well, but you'd have to have more logic. I made it simple because I was in a hurry. But it is set to smooth 1.5, transition time, hide imps. And we have a rotator set to 100% strength, 100% overall dampening, local space. And I've connected a series of logical inputs inside this microchip. And basically, if we go over here, we can see that I've connected the right stick local to this in order to aim the camera around. I've also connected it to this microchip, this node here, which will aim our camera up and down and rotate the player. So right stick local, well, connected to this splitter, and this splitter is connected to another splitter, then connected to a combiner, plus to plus, minus to minus, and the output goes into the rotation speed of our rotator. Next, I've got a laser scope set to point at tags called grapple point, which you may remember earlier. Grapple point is on there. It's got a limited range, and it's set to detect machine, similar to the other laser scope we saw in there. The difference is this one can be used without aiming the camera. It's a default way to use the grapple. And I put it in just in case you're interested in how to do that. You could conceivably delete one or the other of these camera rigs and it would still work just as well. I'm just showing you the two different methods you can go about it. It's also got X-ray mode turned off so that it can't go through walls. And I've got a little handy-dandy trigger zone set to detect a tag called Can Grapple. It's a rather robust sized zone, and all it's going to do is detect this. So when it finds that tag, this will be active and the laser scope will start looking for something to point at. It will also turn on this text displayer with a prompt to use square, which, by the way, if you may recognize earlier, square is what we're going to use to fire our grappling hook. And we've got this keyframe, which all it does is turn off the NOT gate, if I'm not mistaken. That's pretty much all it does. But I believe we have covered everything there is to cover. And now we're going to go ahead and test our logic in action, so that you can see how it all comes together. Hopefully, if we followed all those points properly, everything will be just fine. So, aim with L1. Here's how we steer our camera in default mode. Now we're going to switch to the aiming camera, press square, and there we go. We're swinging. And X to detach. Now if you don't want to use aim and you'd rather just have it so that when you walk up you can just grapple something, you can do it by default and not use the aim camera at all. Square, leap, square, leap. And by pressing L1, or if you want to replace L1 with another prompt, you can. I decided to use L1. If you want to use L2 or any other prompt, just take all the instances of the video in which I say L1 and change it. But we're going to make our chord static and we're going to turn it around so that we can go a different direction. We can go back, push forward, and we'll start out swinging. Then once we have enough momentum, can be a little finicky if they're too close together, so keep that in mind. And the height also plays a role in it. Not saying the system's perfect, mind you. And if you want to eliminate this, grapple altogether, I have made it so you can just do a default chord. The only thing I've removed is the ability to destroy the chord. And the way it works is you just jump onto it, and then you can just, naturally swing. It also doesn't use the initial boost, because it doesn't use the same methodology as the firing grappling hook timeline that we did earlier. But anyway, that's all the ways to do a little grappling hook with a tether. A rope, if you will. I don't know what to call it particularly, but hopefully you found that helpful. Maybe the system can be improved upon, even. But this is the best I could come up with, and someone did request it, so I hope you find it satisfactory. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was an insightful video or otherwise enjoyable. If it was, then go ahead and subscribe if you can, and hit the bell to keep up with our videos. Also, subscribed or not, give a like. If you have any questions or statements, leave a comment. We try to answer all comments. If you like what we do here and want to help out, consider becoming a channel member. Alternatively, you can check out the link in the description to support us through Patreon. Until next time, take it easy. That's all for now.